My Italian connection goes back a long way. My great-grandfathers, two of them came out to Australia in 1880, and they ended up great. They met in Melbourne, they ended up great friends, started a business together, went into the outback. They had 7 children, and one of their children, one of the other children married each other, which was gorgeous, and they then had my dad, Theo, and so yes, so I'm half Italian. My 2 great-grandfathers started a business up the wool track, so they ended up in Hillston and Ivanhoe, which you could not get more outback than Hillston and Ivanhoe, and they were there for, Francesco Villa was there for nearly 20 years. Brought his children up. My grandmother came down to Rose Bay Convent from Ivanhoe in a horse and trap. And anyway, so as time progressed, then their children met and they ended up marrying, and then Dad married my mum, Mary Rossi, who started Mary Rossi Travel. And Mum sort of realised when we were growing up, by the time we were 16, that Australians had a bit of the wrong idea about Italy. You know, Italy was this amazing place. And so she decided that all of us would pick up and go and live in Florence for a year. So as a family, we all went and lived in Florence. And at the time, Mum was also doing some television. And she'd met the Ferragamo family. And beautiful Fiamma Ferragamo found us a house to live in Florence. And so we went and lived there for a year. Growing up in Australia, so I was born in the 1950s. In my early time, we were just this great big family. You know, we were like, I suppose people would say, oh, typical Italian family, loud, noisy, 10 children, lots of fun, dinners were always amazing, and it was really great fun. It wasn't until I sort of started going to school that I started realising, you know, being Italian wasn't quite as cool as you know, people thought, because it was after the war and people had this perception that we were, you know, on the other side, and you know, well, we new to Australia, and you know, we've been here 3 generations, but it was a very different feeling. But I suppose the fact that we had all this background of love and big families and gorgeous associations, that we never really found it that bad. We just thought these people were uneducated when they made things like that. So some people it did tend to affect, it didn't really affect us that much. When David and I left university, we were looking for something to do. Most of our friends were going and working for big accounting firms or law firms, and we both came from both sides of our families, had long tradition of entrepreneurial businesses, working for ourselves, self-employed, I suppose. And David's father had this idea of the fruit and vegetable business because he owned a big chicken business, and he said, you know, the big guys don't do this well. They don't even sell fruit and vegetables. You know, we should do something. You know, you could do something that's sort of around this. Said there's this shop in Chatswood, go and have a look at it. So we started this business called Harris Farm Markets, and it was interesting at the time. Of course, it was run mainly by Italians, fruit and vegetable businesses, and a few Greeks. Mainly Italians, but a few Greeks. And of course, when we first started it, you know, they thought, you know, David, who's this, you know, he's not Italian. And they said, yeah, but his wife is. So we had a little bit of an in there. What happened was with Harris Farm is that I suppose because of the big family business that we'd come from, and because of our love of food, it just was such a natural fit. And it also meant that we could bring something to the sort of the big fruit businesses that other people didn't bring, because we were eating foods that just weren't being sold, especially in the eastern suburbs or the North Shore. You know, everybody was buying carrots and peas and potatoes and doing very well, but they weren't buying melanzane or, you know, beautiful capsicums or grey zucchini. Nobody had ever heard of grey zucchini. Or tomatoes. Tomatoes really affected, we were really cutting edge in tomatoes because we knew what it was like to have real tasting tomatoes, whereas the big department stores, they wanted tomatoes that would last on the shelves for 4 weeks. Whereas we were really happy to have those beautiful, odd-shaped ox-heart tomatoes and things like that. And whoa, you know, they were so beautiful and flavoursome. Again, that comes from our Italian heritage. And I think the other thing is that really helped our business dramatically, coming from this sort of Italian background, was that back in the day, when you did really sophisticated cooking, it was for dinner parties. And they were, you know, everybody would be cooking, you know, beef Wellington and things like that. Whereas for us, food was family. Food was having dinner, and every time we have dinner, there's probably 10 people at this table. And I think that was another way that we sort of changed our thoughts about the fruit and vegetable business, that this was about families, this was about eating, this was about the joy of food. My career was very much shaped really around Harris Farm Market. So when I first left uni, I went and worked for Grace Brothers because we were going to start Harris Farm. So I sort of learnt the corporate side of retailing while David set up the shop, and we needed an income, so I had the income. And then it went on that I then had a baby, and in those days when you had a baby you had to leave the business thing. So I left Grace Brothers because I said I was pregnant. So I started working at Harris Farm. But then what happened was we had a company that came in as a shareholder. I think they thought I was making tea. So, you know, you can't have your wife working in the same business as you. And so I went off and started my own career. My background was marketing, and I worked with my mum, Mary Rossi, who owned Mary Rossi Travel, and I started there, and then I went off into other marketing areas. I went and worked for the University of New South Wales, and then from there I was headhunted to the government to work for Equal Opportunity for Women in Australia, to head that up. And then I went on a board career. Yeah, so, but all the time going back to Harris Farm Markets. And so after I stopped working for the government, I went back full-time to work for Harris Farm Markets. I've been incredibly lucky, and I've had some fantastic highlights, and I've got some awards and things like that. But absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, the highlight of my career is having 5 gorgeous sons who I adore, and I think they like us, and a gorgeous husband. And to me, that's the best thing there is to have. Everything else is sort of by the by. So it's interesting. So part of my career, especially working, for example, Equal Opportunity for Women and other things I've done, was again shaped by my early childhood, in that people, you know, when they'd say things to you about, you know, are you a wog and something, it made me so aware how ignorance drives inequality, and ignorance drives misunderstanding between people. Whereas it's something that we brought into Harris Farm, that we thought, here's this huge opportunity of bringing all these different people into the business. So we've got now 39 different nationalities that work for us. So Harris Farm has always, we've just sort of grown on that concept, that feeling of family, and that goes not only into us and all our staff, the whole joy of eating and food, but also integrating communities. For example, if we go into our shop at Leichhardt, we have concession of a beautiful Italian family who just brings in and has this amazing prosciutto and fantastic cured hams and speck, and it's just fabulous. And so again, it's that community, people working together. And I think so much of this comes from our Italian, just the word family is just what resonates through everything. Interestingly, I've got white hair now, but I used to have very dark hair, and everybody assumed that that was from my dad's side of the family. But in fact, my family came from Bergamo, so they were quite fair. And actually, my grandmother had blue eyes. And my mother came from Ireland, and I was sort of the Irish side of the family. So it's not really, it's not that I look Italian. I actually look like Mum. But what makes me feel Italian is, again, I go back to the word family, love of music. I mean, my grandparents just absolutely had music, and Dad had music blaring all the time. So the arts, opera, I've been involved with the Museum of Contemporary Art, I've been involved with the ballet, I've been on the board of all these organisations, board of the National Gallery, because I think that very much is part of my Italian love of culture and background. It's just so part of me. With a surname like Rossi, even though I use Harris more than Rossi, I still have lots of Rossi siblings and Rossi family, so we're very close, and we're a very close family. We love travelling to Italy. I've been to every just about square foot. Italy has had such an influence on Australia, much more than we would have ever thought, and so Italians feel so at home here. So I hope a lot more come to Australia.
Buonasera, salute!